What is up, people? Dunna here, and today we get to talk about something that I've been waiting to talk about for so long, the Fujifilm X-T4. Fujifilm Canada was nice enough to send over a pre-production model of the X-T4 for me to play with for the past couple of weeks so that I could share my thoughts with you guys. But that being said, make sure you keep those words, pre-production model, in mind, because some of the issues that I've run into might get fixed up with firmware, or they might be fixed up by the time that the full production model comes out, which actually might already be now by the time this video comes out. I'll leave links in the description to go check out the X-T4, or if you want to pick one up. In this video, we're going to talk about some important features of this camera, some of the good things about this camera, some of the not so good things. I'll give you guys my rundown on my experience with the X-T4, and of course, I'll be showing you guys photos and videos taken using the X-T4 so that you can see for yourself on things like stabilization, low light performance, autofocus, and more. And actually, speaking of which, you might notice that I'm not currently holding the X-T4 in my hands or showing it to you or anything like that, and that's because I'm actually filming on it right now so you guys can see how it would perform in a situation like this. Okay, to kick things off,
let's talk specs.
the Fujifilm X-T4 shares the same back-illuminated 26.1 megapixel X-Trans CMOS 4 sensor that you'll find in the X-T3, X-T30, X Pro 3, and X100V, so we're probably not going to see huge changes in image quality. It's an APS-C size sensor with a 1.5 times crop compared to full-frame sensors. It has a 3.69 million dot electronic viewfinder and a 1.62 million dot rear monitor, which both look fantastic. The body weighs 607 grams with a battery and SD card in it. It's weather sealed at 63 different points, and they claim it can function down to -10 degrees Celsius. It has dual UHS-2 card slots that can be customized to write backups or continuously from one card to the next. The X-T4 has sensor shift in-body image stabilization as well as added digital image stabilization. In video mode, you can shoot H.265 10-bit 420 internally or 422 externally. The X-T4 will shoot up to 60 frames per second in 4K and now shoots up to 240 frames per second in full 1920 by 1080. On paper, this is one of the most exciting cameras that I've seen in quite a long time. But how did it perform over the past couple of weeks? Like I said, I've had the pleasure to shoot with the X-T4 for a couple of weeks now, along with the fantastic 16-55 f2.8 lens, and there are a few things that really stood out to me. I mentioned in the intro that this camera shares a sensor with some of the previous Fuji cameras, and as expected, the image quality is exactly what we've come to know from those cameras as well. We've got those classic Fuji colors, including all of their inbuilt film emulations, and one new one called Eterna Bleach Bypass, which is super contrasty and desaturated. Not really my jam, but hey, if you like it, that's cool. One of the big differences that comes with the X-T4 sensor is its new stabilization. This is one of the big things that I personally felt the X-T3 was missing, and I'm glad to see that they implemented it into this camera. They claim you can get 6.5 extra stops from the stabilization, but I definitely put it to the test myself. For photography, I took some shots at 55mm and found that the slowest shutter speed that I could get usably sharp images was 1/30th of a second with the stabilization turned off. With stabilization turned on, I was able to get down to 1/3 of a second before I couldn't get a sharp image from all the small handshakes. Now, if my math is correct here, that's just a little over 3 stops of light, which is fantastic, but it's not the 6.5 that they mentioned in the spec sheet. I have to assume that the 6.5 is more of a lab result to try and bump up the numbers, whereas my results are probably a bit more of a practical situation. You may also get different results depending on what focal length you're using. But what about in video mode? I tested 2 different situations to see how much the new in-body stabilization helps. The first test I performed was a handheld shot zoomed into 55mm or 82.5mm full frame equivalent, trying to hold steady on a non-moving subject. The first shot I took was with no stabilization at all, and you can tell for sure. I did my best to use all the techniques I could think of to be steady, but there's a lot of shaking going on. The next shot I took was with the in-body stabilization engaged, and it makes a huge difference to get rid of those little hand jitters that we saw in the first shot. When you're zoomed in like this, a little stabilization can really be helpful. And finally, the third shot uses both the in-body stabilization as well as digital stabilization done inside the camera. And to be honest, for this kind of shot, it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference from just the in-body stabilization. Most likely because the IBIS was already doing a good job and there's not a whole lot of moving going on anyway. Also, it's important to note that the digital stabilization adds an extra 1.29 times crop to the image. The next test that I performed was a walking shot, and to be specific, it was a vlog style where I was filming myself. As a control, I started with no stabilization and it is obviously super shaky. Next, I turned on the in-body stabilization and we see a marked improvement. In the next one, I turned IBIS on and engaged something they call stabilization boost, which is supposed to increase the stabilization even more. I honestly didn't see much of a difference from the previous settings though. Next, I engaged the digital stabilization on top of IBIS, but I removed the boost. This is where things started to get weird. If you've ever had a clip that you felt was unstable and you tried to stabilize it in post and it went all warpy and wobbly on you, that's basically what this looks like. Not super stoked on how this turned out. And finally, with both IBIS and digital stabilization, I added the boost back on, and once again, we're getting that wobbly and warpy stuff because of the digital stabilization, and I don't see a huge difference in smoothness from with or without the boost. So overall, I'm super glad that they added the IBIS into the camera. I would probably stay away from the digital stabilization, but again, that's something that they could improve a lot with firmware updates later on. There are two other problems that... Can I help you? What are you doing? I'm shooting a video about the Fujifilm X-T4. Oh, okay. How are you gonna carry it? Can't you see that I'm kind of in the middle of something right now? No, for real, I gotta know. How are you gonna carry it? With my hands? It seems like kind of a weird question. What if you want to eat a sandwich? Are you actually being serious right now? No, I'm 100% serious. I have to know. I mean, I guess if I was like absolutely desperate and I needed a sandwich at that very specific moment, I would like toss the camera into a bag. Maybe something like the new Moment rugged sling bag. Wait, did you say Moment? Like the people that make stuff for phones and the variable NDs? Yep. The very same. They also have an online store, shopmoment.com, where you can buy all sorts of stuff. Actually, like the Fujifilm X-T4 as well. But this is their first foray into the bag world. It's called the Moment Rugged Sling. This guy right here. Okay, what's so special about it? I mean, first of all, the form factor is awesome. The sling bag is a really cool way to carry around your gear. If you just want to bring like a little bit of stuff, but you don't want to lug around like a big backpack kind of thing. It comes in two different sizes. The bigger one, you can fit a camera, two lenses, your phone, your keys, a tablet even, all sorts of stuff in there for just when you're kind of going out and about. The organization inside it is really great. It's got fantastic, tough materials. This outside part is actually made of waterproof sailcloth. Wait, did you just say sailcloth? Like the stuff that they use on the sails on the boats? Exactly. So it's super rugged and you don't need like an extra rain cover for it if it starts raining outside. Okay, this thing sounds kind of awesome. Where can I get one? I mean, there's a link in the description where you can go and check it out, or if you wanted to purchase it. What description? What are you talking about? Just give me that one. You're being serious right now, aren't you? You know what? It'll get you out of here. Let me finish my video. Here you go. All right. Thanks to Moment for sponsoring this video. That guy. There were two other things that I had problems with in the X-T3 that have been addressed in the X-T4. The first of those improvements has to do with the ergonomics. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the dials and buttons setup of Fuji, and while they have made some improvements to the layout of their function and custom buttons, I still choose to customize the camera to bypass the shutter speed and ISO dials on the top in favor of front and back dials. But I'm happy that they give me the option to do that. I still really dislike the placement of the focus select switch down on the front left of the camera. In order to change it, I have to actually turn the camera around to make sure that I'm in the right mode. I guess you'd probably get a feel for it eventually, but it still feels like a weird place to put it. The one dial that I am super happy they added was the dedicated stills and movie mode dial. This makes it super convenient, not only flipping between modes, but also because it remembers your settings from each mode and it customizes the menus to the mode that you're in, which coming from Sony systems systems is something that I have always wanted. But the biggest thing ergonomically that was a huge change for me is the grip. They've extended the grip to be even deeper and give you a better feel when one-handing the camera. It's still not as deep as I'd like it to be, but it's gone from me never wanting to hold it to where I can look past the little lack of grip. The other big problem that I had before was the battery life on the X-T3, and luckily we're seeing a brand new battery with significantly increased capacity compared to previous models. I did still find myself running out of battery more often than compared to something like the Sony Z batteries on my a6600 or a7 III, but it's not too far off now, and obviously those cameras have different features sucking up the battery life differently than this one does. And speaking of the batteries and the grip, there is a new battery grip designed for the X-T4 that houses 2 extra batteries. It deepens the main grip of the camera as well as it gives you a headphone jack. Wait, did you just say the battery grip gives you the headphone jack? Yep. They took the headphone jack off of the body of the camera that they gave us in the X-T3. Fear not, however, as they are now including a USB-C dongle that allows you to use the USB-C port as a headphone out if you don't have the extended battery grip. It's a trade-off because you can't have power plugged in and be monitoring on headphones at the same time, but at least it's a workaround. Another big addition to the physical part of the camera is a new fully articulating side flip screen, and let me just say, I am a fan. This style of screen has a few advantages. First of all, it's great for vlogging or filming yourself because you can see yourself. I'm using it right now and I don't have to look at it all the time, but it's just nice to know that my exposure is right and my framing is nice. And I can also check how much recording time I have left and my battery life, those kinds of things. Secondly, it's great for getting higher or lower angle shots in a vertical orientation because you can flip it out and then tilt it. I shoot a lot of vertical orientation stuff for Instagram, and this is a huge help. And thirdly, you can close the screen in a way where it's protected. So now you can toss this camera into a bag and not have to worry about the screen getting scratched. I mean, be careful with your stuff anyway, but still, it's handy. The X-T4 can now shoot bursts as fast as 15 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, which is super impressive and will be great for sports and action shooters. It also has one of the best sensor readout speeds short of having a global shutter. This means you won't see nearly as much of that nasty rolling shutter that you see on a ton of other cameras in the same class. One thing that I really hope to see Fuji do away with is the 30-minute record limit. Now you can always use an external recorder to get past this, but it would be nice to see it built in like we're seeing on the newer Sony cameras. It seems like Fuji is gunning for Sony and crushing them in a lot of ways, so I'm really surprised we didn't see the record limit done away with in this camera. But who knows, maybe we will in an update. One place where they really did step it up and crush the competition is by adding 240 frames per second slow motion in full 1920 by 1080 HD. There's a bit more of a crop and it might be a little bit softer of an image, but I was really impressed with the quality that still came out of this setting. I honestly think that having 4K 60 frames per second and 1080 240 frames per second is such a killer combo for your slow motion needs. But if you're a 120 frames per second kind of person, that's still there too, and it looks great. Again, image quality wise, we're seeing pretty much what we know from the X-T3. This sensor does really well in low light for an APS-C size sensor. I would argue that you could probably push it up to about 3200 ISO in stills and still get a really usable image. In my test, I noticed that even when I really push the ISO, there's something about the way that Fuji handles noise that's more pleasing than some of the other cameras. So you might be able to get away with pushing it a little bit further, not because there's less noise, but just because it handles it nicer. As we would expect, it comes with the ability to use F-Log for video and squeeze some extra dynamic range out of your shots, but they've also included an F-Log view assist that helps you to properly expose your F-Log shots. Another area where Fujifilm claimed to make some serious improvements was in their autofocus system. So I did some testing for myself. When using autofocus for stills, I had no issues whatsoever. It's fast, it snaps to the right point with minimal hunting, and the tracking feature is really handy as well. However, when it came to autofocus in video mode, I ran into some issues. During that vlogging stabilization test that I showed you guys earlier, I found that the face and eye tracking did a great job, but when I went to do a moving subject test, I had very different results. Previously in the X-T3, I ran into an issue where the autofocus was actually too snappy and it didn't work well for video where you might want to have a more smooth transition no matter what settings I had it on. So for the X-T4, I was ready to try adjusting some settings in the camera and see if we could dial that in a little bit better this time around. What I got instead was a whole lot of hunting, missing focus, and weird behavior that no matter what settings I had the autofocus system on, it just wouldn't work. I tested walking towards the camera and away from the camera and had issues with it not finding the face, losing the face, and not actually getting to focus on the face at all. Then I did a test where I turned away from the camera for a second after gaining focus, and when I turned back, it had more trouble trying to find the face again. The same issues persisted when I stepped out of the frame and back into it again. Now, all that being said, these were admittedly unusual conditions, and I'm sure that it would work just fine in a more practical vlogging or talking to the camera setting like this, but this seemed a bit weird to me, and hopefully it can be improved with the production models or with firmware, or maybe there was just something about this one situation that just wasn't working well. So the question is, who is this camera for? Well, overall, this camera probably has the best specs of any APS-C camera on the market. And at $1,700 right now, it's still a few $100s cheaper than the Sony a7 III and $100 cheaper than the EOS R if you were considering going full frame. Also, some of the specs of this camera kind of blow those ones out of the water. Some of my autofocus tests had me a bit worried, but with the rest of my experience with this camera being so fantastic, I would still probably recommend this to nearly anyone who is a hybrid video and photo shooter. If you only shoot photos or you're not worried about the IBIS or the flip screen, I probably say go with the X-T3 since you're getting the same image quality from the same sensor anyway. Another thing to consider is, like I mentioned earlier, for me, the Fuji layout of controls, it isn't really my favorite. It can be customized like crazy, which is really nice, but I much prefer the controls of some other cameras. So if you're not super into the aesthetic and the ergonomics of this style, you might want to look at another brand. And finally, but maybe most importantly, Fuji has a very specific look to it. Some people love it, some people don't like it, and it's just something that you need to consider when you're looking at these cameras. But as always, I want to know what you think. Leave a comment below and let me know what your impressions are from the Fujifilm X-T4. Or if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down there and I'll do my best to answer. And on your way down, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification so you don't miss when I post new videos. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to Fujifilm Canada for lending me this camera to try out, and I'll see you next time.